I'm not presenting, but I'm introducing students from our Introduction to Literary and Cultural Studies course, and they're going to take both a meta view of the research process and walk you through kind of what the research process entails for them, talking about research in the humanities specifically, and talking about their individual research projects over the course of the semester. This course is an odd one in that we have no shared central literary text everyone's working on, but everyone chooses an independent study project. So I see it as kind of the sophomore capstone of the English major, and everyone's pursuing a research project over the course of a semester, and then we use it as a writing and research workshop together. So we have 6 speakers today. Sam couldn't be with us, and everyone's going to talk us through 7. We have 7. Sam's still not with us. And we're going to turn it over to Andre, who's going to lead us off with the Hitchhiker's Guide to Resources.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I know it's a little early. I hope everybody's all right. It's the first one of the day. As a sophomore, I was alarmed when I had an underclassman come up to me and ask me where he would go to get sources for his paper. Initially, my comment was sarcastic, and I was just like, go to the library. And he was like, what's that building? And it was a long, drawn-out conversation that we worked it out. But then I began to realize that most students here at Oglethorpe don't realize the resources that are available to them at our library. And we have so many great things there. And I just want to go through the resource process. This is the foundation of how we build our research projects. So I started off with the Philip Wiltner Library, which is one of the best things we have here on campus. And then we can go into Galileo and Zotero, which are both programs that we used in our research class to help further our own research. So let's start with the Philip Wiltner Library. We have a library on campus, guys. That's the first thing. Go there, there's great things. Go to the stacks. There's plenty of resources for any topic you could ever want to find. It's great. Personally, we took a class field trip downstairs where we went and just explored the stacks and found things related to our topics, unrelated to our topics that we just thought were cool. It's a great place. But if you're like me, my research topic was on Brave New World, and we didn't have anything on dystopian literature. So I use we also have this resource online because our library is connected to almost every other library from a university in Georgia. So if we don't have a book, we can get a book. So I used the Interlibrary Loan, or ILL. There's a nice little access form online on our library's webpage. You go in and you type what you're looking for and where you saw it or where you can find it. And if another school has it, they will send it to you. And you can use it. It's the greatest thing. Greatest thing. Also, a mad shout out to the staff of our library because they know everything you need. Like, if you are lost in the beginning of your research process, if you don't know where the stacks are, if you don't know how to work Galileo, if you don't know how to use ILL, so shout outs to Tony Zimmerman and Eli and everybody who's there. They are the greatest people and they help you through all the stuff. All right. They also are big users of Galileo. I know some of us have probably taken, they give a seminar usually as a freshman so that you know how to use Galileo and whatnot. But in case you happen to miss that or skip that or decided that it wasn't important, we can go to Galileo, which it's an interesting resource. It's an online database in which you can search journal entries and articles. And once again, this is a massive database from things that have been published. I believe it goes all the way back to 1965, so it's a massive archive. Everything from then until now, you can do keyword searches, you can do it by topic, you can do it by what's in the abstract, you can do it by, what are some other things? Keyword searches, it's a great tool. It goes really, really in depth. The important thing though, I want to do this for anybody who's never used Galileo, that when you're looking at articles, you do want to find something that is peer reviewed. That just means that some other scholar who's proficient in that field has gone over this, they have read this, they've researched this, and they agree with what's going on in this article. It's great, and that way you don't have to hope you're picking something valid for your own research topic. So just a brief page, it looks something like this. You can get full PDF texts. It breaks down all those different subjects for you. There's a nice little abstract. This one was in relation to my topic, so I was talking about feminism in Brave New World. Once again, it's a great resource. It has all the information you need there. It's beautiful. All right, particularly for our class, we started using a program called Zotero. Now, I'm sure nobody has heard of Zotero. It's a great thing. It's got a plugin that you just put into your Google Chrome or your Mozilla Firefox. I suggest not using Internet Explorer. But it's a tool, and when you use it, it helps you generate your own bibliography. And it integrates itself into your Word programs as well as into your internet browser. So say you're using something like Galileo, and you say, oh, this is a source I really want to use. It has a nice little additional plugin that you click, and then it adds it to your Zotero profile, and then it has all your bibliographic information. So I think I have a couple examples. So take, for example, we have the same page that we just saw before. But in the top right-hand corner, I've circled this you get this little note when you have the plugin. And it says, hey, if you want this source, you just click on this, and it adds it to your Zotero page. And so all that information that was on there is put right on the side for you. It gives you a list of all the things that you need. It's a list of all your things, all of your sources. So articles, books, journal entries, anything that you found, you can input it into Zotero. If it's online, you just do a simple click. But if it's a book or something, you can manually insert it. And so it creates your own bibliography. And so when you get to typing it into your Word program, it has a portion, like the first time I believe you didn't type it in manually, but at the very end, when it's like, make my bibliography, it takes everything that you used from your Zotero page and adds it right on in there for you. Sometimes you have to edit it. I'll say it is a program, it is freeware. So sometimes it's like, oh, feminism comes before technology, and sometimes it's like, Wells and Lawrence come before feminism, and you're like, alphabetizing things is hard. Other than that, the basics for getting you going on your research guide. I hope this was helpful, and I would like to pass it over to my next colleague, Deidre. So I didn't know if Kurt would do next. Deidre. Here we go.
Stage, when you're writing notes on your computer, just like put it in like some crazy font. I don't know, Century Gothic or something. Or like whatever you want to. Comic Sans. But when you do this, try to make it in 12-point font, because that's like the font that all teachers want. And then like when you're done with your paper, change it, and usually when you change it, you'll find when you change like the Times New Roman, your paper will kind of like expand itself, which is always good. You might end up with like an extra page that you didn't even anticipate. But yeah, if you're just writing any kind of font you want, I find that it's just like easier to write, and it helps me. Sometimes I just will be writing a draft and be like, you know what, this font makes me sick. Change it to something else, and it helps. So that's one thing. Shrinking sense of responsibility. Okay, this is something I do with practically all my papers. It's probably not something very scholarly to do, but I do not double space. When I'm writing, I always write single space because I'm really hyper-conscious of how much I'm writing. So if you have like a super long paper, like 20 pages, more than 20 pages, about it cut in half. And it just, if you do it in single space and you think you're only actually writing 10 pages, it can kind of like calm you and make it less freaked out about it. So yeah, like I said, it could be confidence booster when you like, you double space like your 4 pages and you have like 8 pages and you're like, whoa, I'm halfway done. So like, of course that's like that could be kind of dangerous to do though. Because if you write in like single space, and like if you, for example, in this example, if you have 20 pages and you're just writing and you're like, I don't know where I'm trying to go with that. Anyway, I guess I'll just talk about the next slide. Don't try to sound like a scholar. When you're in your first stages of writing your paper, when you're writing a draft, just like write whatever comes naturally. Write in any style. Just write. Like it doesn't. I think a lot of college students just think they have to write in a particular way, and they might end up writing more complicated, like using bigger words and writing in a more complicated style than they have to try to like impress their teachers or impress others when you don't really need to write that way. As long as, I feel like as long as you get your point across and you're fine. So, but I mean you should always ask your professors if the way you're writing is fine and if it's acceptable, but in general don't try to sound like you're like you read a thesaurus every night before you go to bed. Don't do that. Oh, whoa, I never lived like that. Okay, something that gets me when I'm writing papers is citations. I hate writing works cited pages. I just really hate it. So if you know what you're going to cite from in your draft stage, like just take the time before you're like, I guess you've done and just write everything. Just do your works cited page. Like if you're randomly sitting in the dining hall and on Tumblr, just stop and do your works cited page. Like I don't know. Also use Zotero because it's awesome. It's really good. The next tip I have is try to write as much as you can, whenever you can, about whatever you can, because deadlines are always closer than you think. It could just be when you wake up in the morning. Oh, that's a bad example. If you're sitting waiting for a bus and you have an idea about something, try to write it down. Right here, I suggest that when you get the topic assigned, you try to write as much as you can, which I think is a good idea because for me, I get kind of nervous about most topics that are assigned to me, even if they're like 3 to 2 weeks away in like when they're due. So I kind of want to try to get it done early, and this sort of thing helps because if you start this and you keep going at it day by day or week by week, if it's a longer project, it helps, and you'll have something at like the end of your like 2 or 3 weeks that you can work with for a draft, which I think is my next slide. All the stuff that you've been brainstorming from like the first day that you wrote whatever you felt like, and all those other days you just like randomly compiled stuff, you could just put it all together and bam, here's a draft. It's like magic. Oh yeah, oh, wolf is done.
Our next speaker is.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you guys for just being here. We had fierce competition with panels like the N-word, so I'm just grateful that we got an audience. So mine is entitled Risky Research, and I will get down to explaining the importance and the necessity of doing thorough and succinct research. I'll give you a brief anecdote. When I first signed up for the class I'm taking now, Intro to Literature and Cultural Studies, I did not do research, and then found out later on it's really, research methods. But, again, that's kind of just a brief anecdote about making sure that you're doing enough fact searching. So we'll start with the first slide. So you think you can research. One of the texts that we are using in our current class is Richard Diedricks' The Art of Literary Research, and he begins with like all these really wonderful, scholarly, meaty quotes. Like good researchers are, by virtual definition, thoroughgoing skeptics. And so what this means is that when you're doing research, when you're looking through archives, when you're reading any material, you're not simply reading it to learn, I guess, a hard fact or an established fact that can't be tested, that can't be, questioned. So you should never read something and just off the merit of it being published or in a book, assume that this information is factual and correct. You should always constantly be searching deeper. Research is a process that really involves you and the author as well, not just you kind of listening and taking something in like an automaton droid. The next slide is erroneous editing. I bring it up because no matter how sophisticated we have computer programs, no matter how sophisticated we are as far as technology goes, there are always going to be an infinite number of mistakes during the editing process. A lot of times this occurs with small publishing houses that have budgetary restraints. So you may have a history book or a comprehensive history of Europe or something of that nature, and you have 3 or 4 editors logging in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dates. Well, I mean, it's pretty feasible to say at some point that there probably will be a mistake or an error here or there. And a lot of times these cause what are called ghosts by Richard Diedricks. So you might read like a bibliography of all British literature from 1800 to 1954. And in that bibliography, there may be a mistake. There may be a different edition attributed to a book that maybe only has 3 editions, but there's 4 listed. So a lot of times those ghosts appear, and they just kind of get perpetuated if we're not constantly being aware and saying, okay, let me check this fact. Let me see if this is really true or not, because nobody's heard of this edition of this book. So we have to kind of avoid, rhetoric in that sense. The next slide is the persistence of myths. One of the really great examples I like in the Art of Literary Research is a myth about Robert Louis Stevenson and personal letters that he wrote to a woman named Claire. For many years, there's a myth that persisted that she was a lover, or a girlfriend, or a sweetheart. Even one more exciting, that she was a prostitute, and I guess he was getting ready to kick the door in, shotgun strapped to his back and save her from her horrible existence. But it turns out journalist J.C. Furness eventually established that this identity of this woman was none other than Mrs. Sitwell, who was a confidant and friend. But the myth persisted for over 50 years that she was, either a prostitute or a lover or something kind of fantastic. And myths like that persist, a lot of times because they're, romantic, they're exciting. How great would it have been for Robert Louis Stevenson to save a woman from, a brothel and, just real action-oriented type stuff. But we have to be careful to not let these myths persist because they continue to be handed down year and year and year and year after time. And if nobody combats them, well, then we all have a lot of incorrect knowledge. The next slide is called Challenge the Power of the Publisher. Again, like I mentioned earlier, just because something is published and it's written in a book and it has the word, the best edition of The Great Gatsby, the most comprehensive edition of X, Y, and Z, the complete, you know, we use those adjectives, they use those monikers and attribute them to literature, but just because it says complete or definitive doesn't mean it is. A particular example, in 1970, a collection of F. Scott Fitzgerald's works were produced in a book called 3 Novels. So it contains some of his most popular novels, including The Great Gatsby. In this particular section, they had a number of 75 changes which were made to The Great Gatsby that was originally published. A lot of people consider this version to be the most true to what Fitzgerald actually wanted The Great Gatsby to read like. But what's interesting is 37 of the changes were made by the publisher and not Fitzgerald. 38 that Fitzgerald wanted were included posthumously, but you have to consider that's still a lot of influence that the publisher and the editor had over the production of this version of The Great Gatsby. And so essentially we're still kind of left with no real true version of what, you know, Fitzgerald's vision was. And this is really important, I think, even in an interdisciplinary sense. Currently I'm taking Introduction to Archaeology, and so you have to think about anthropologists, you have to think about cognitive archaeologists who count on literature, who count on books, who count on, you know, stories that come that are handed down through oral tradition, sometimes to lead them to clues. You know, with the discovering of the city of Troy, a lot of people, you know, used legends and myths and epics in order to get descriptions about what the city was supposed to look like. And so it's important for us to maintain, you know, that sense of, you know, vigilance when it comes to research, so that we're making sure the right information is perpetuated and we're not just counting on rhetoric. You know, for example, I would say, you know, how many people knew that F. Scott Fitzgerald actually wrote his first draft of The Great Gatsby at age 13? Did anybody know that? No? Good, because it's a vicious lie. And that's exactly, you know, the type of, that's exactly the type of myth we have to be careful to perpetuate. Just because a guy is standing up and giving you an academic presentation and telling you something, we have to get off of that sense of, well, it comes from the ivory tower, therefore it must be correct. So I would just like to leave you with, be vigilant, always be asking questions, don't be too trusting, account for human error, and when researching, you know, don't just take something at face value, ask questions at all times. Thank you.
So, one of the things that I learned about the research process is that it's very much like the landscape of the novel which I analyzed for my research. There are about 100 different things that could kill it. I remember the first time where I posted my first attempt to try to pose a research question for what I wanted to analyze in my novel. And what Dr. Terry did is opened her mouth and a volcanic stream of lava came down and rained on the paper and burned the research question alive. But it was all necessary and it was all important because the intense scrutiny of trying to find a research question ultimately allows it to produce a really good question in the end. Basically that's what I'm going to be talking about. The first step of creating a research question, which is arguably the longest step, if I may say so myself. Basically, what I said, the novel that I was analyzing is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. You're probably going to see a motif of an extensive amount of red for a reason. It's one of the most brilliant novels of the century, but also one of the bloodiest, with extensive and graphic imagery of carnage and violence. Essentially what it is about, Harold Bloom calls it the ultimate Western not to be surpassed, and also calls McCarthy a worthy disciple of Faulkner and Melville. And essentially what the novel deals with is this anonymous main character named the Kid, who goes on this westward trek, across Texas and through Mexico as well, with this group of scalp hunters and with this judge who can only be described as diabolical and demonic. Quite literally, he's like this big, monstrous, albino man who's 7 feet tall, and he's a pedophile, and there are many attempts to try to kill him, and they fail. And it's regarded as an anti-Western in the sense that it doesn't romanticize the West. It instead portrays it as this disgusting, vile, putrid, bloody, destructive, organed and limbed-littered environment that's supposed to be an allegory to the contemporary United States. And go ahead. And many problems arose in trying to find a research question. Primarily, one of them being a lack of confidence. Like I said, McCarthy is a disciple of Faulkner and Melville, meaning that if he's not putting 100 words into a single sentence, he is also utilizing, in trying to read that one sentence that has 100 words in it, you'll probably have to rummage through the dictionary at least another 100 times to describe what the hell he's saying. And it brought a lot of complication to try to bring this question, in trying to bring a research question, considering that I felt like I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't feel like I knew what I was reading about. And ultimately, I solved this problem. It ultimately got so bad, actually, that I took a hiatus, and by that I mean I gave up for a little while. And then I had to start reading it all over again, looking at every single passage again, just to be able to understand something. But it was ultimately worth it, considering that it allowed me to take keener notes when every single line that I read. It allowed me to practice close reading the way that it should be done, closely, and by word by word, sentence by sentence. That's what Dr. Terry managed to show me. And instead of looking at the big scale and looking at it as an anti-Western, looking at it from like I said, from each and every single sentence and seeing how it produces and weaves together one cohesive whole. And from that, I was able to acquire the better confidence to be able to ask questions about the novel. What did the judge mean? What is his meaning as a character ultimately mean for the novel itself? And also the second problem was wording the question. To make a long story, that was also a main problem. It was trying to find out a way in which to make in order to make the question informative enough and relevant enough for me to be able to answer it. And it's enormously important, in my opinion, because you need to be able to understand the question in order to be able to provide an answer for it. And also, close reading solved the problem. So now you're probably thinking, well, this is all just focusing on literature. It's all just focusing on a novel. Maybe if you're mathematics or biology or some other kind of sort of major, you're probably wondering what this means for you. I can tell you now that in any sort of research, regardless of what field you're in, you need to be able to understand what the question is before you conduct the research upon it. So if anything, like Kurt mentioned, analyzing research and analysis, especially into literature, involves the individual, the person who's reading. And first and foremost, just look at what you're interested in. What captures your attention the most? And I can promise you that will be the research that you will be most invested in. Personally, for me, it was analyzing the judge, because he's a great character. Harold Bloom compares him to Shakespeare's Iago, because how bad he is. And be specific as possible with your question, and most importantly, give yourself enough time to form a research question. Seriously. It's been 3 months that I've been in this class so far, and I came up with a question 2 days ago. And of course, take notes and write the question down, especially. Because like many professors have said, writing is understanding, writing is comprehending, and to be able to write the question down just makes it a lot easier for you to create a thesis from it. And that's the conclusion.
Next, Hayden's going to talk to us about the stakes of research.
I would conjecture that the majority of people outside of the field of English would, were they to consider the concept of literary research, take for granted the assumption that this branch of scholarship is largely isolated and certainly does not connect to the world at large. In Richard Altick's text, The Art of Literary Research, the author provides an anecdote, one of many, which illustrates exactly the opposite and which I find particularly relevant given our regional location. The writer William Faulkner is generally recognized as one of the most important authors of the South, and his work is considered by many as part of the cultural landscape. Speaking about the branch of literary research, which is referred to in his text as tracing reputation and influence, Altick writes that during a span of no more than 3 years, 1988 to 1990, appeared several case histories of authors' reputations that illustrate the differing approaches used in this newly vivified and provocative branch of scholarship. One author, Lawrence H. Schwartz, in Creating Faulkner's Reputation, The Politics of Modern Literary Criticism, traced the process by which, in the brief period 1946 to 1950, Faulkner was transformed from an obscure author of grotesque and sordid stories laid in a mythical Mississippi county into a giant of modern American literature. The motive force was the new aesthetic sensibility of the moment, a product in turn of the intelligentsia's accommodation to a changed political order. Faulkner's publishers joined a small but fervent group of new critics, the ascendant school of criticism in the America of the day, and New York intellectuals, in mounting a campaign on behalf of his just fame. Prominent among these was Malcolm Cowley, whose Portable Faulkner, issued at a propitious moment, was probably the single most influential contribution to the novelist's almost overnight canonization. In beginning this class and attempting to determine an individual project on which to work, I conceived of a research project very related in nature. Gone with the Wind is a text with which I am very familiar, having returned to it multiple times. While reading the late 19th and early 20th century author Robin John Tagore's novel, Choker Bali, in a world literature class last year, I was struck by the familiarity of certain characters and the relationships existing between them. And although I did not ultimately continue to pursue the project of investigating and possibly establishing influence between these two novels, I am still interested by the idea that a relationship might exist between two texts which are separated by continent and culture, one nearly universally recognized within the United States and the other unknown by the majority of Americans. The project to which I ended up committing is one less concerned with context and origin and involves more focus on textual content. I'm currently working with Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, and my research has consisted of examining the available scholarship to be found in academic journals. The product of such research is less concrete in nature, but it is my belief that it is likewise more important in fostering intellectual community and thought. The synthesis, publication, and reading of scholarly articles allows for academic discussion on a larger and more extended scale, freed from the constraints of time and location. One of the problems with which I found myself concerned in working on my research project is that of finding the words with which to concretely define and discuss the aspects of Mrs. Dalloway that occupy my thought and research. Any person who is familiar with the novel should readily recognize the work's simultaneously psychological and philosophical nature. Unsurprisingly, there is no shortage of scholarly articles analyzing Woolf's work from a psychological perspective. Given my admiration of Virginia Woolf's exploration of interiority in the mind, which I recognize would guide the course of my research in some degree, I was surprised at the disappointment I experienced upon reading many of these articles. This dissatisfaction stemmed from a lack of attention afforded to Woolf's text itself, as well as literary technique and what I would refer to as the more artistic elements of Mrs. Dalloway. Many of these pieces attempted to ground their argument in historical and biographical support. I found this type of scholarship to be less interesting, and this helped to direct the manner in which I worked on my own study of Woolf's novel. In contrast to those pieces which are driven less by authorial craftsmanship, are the examples of scholarship concerned with analyzing Woolf's language and methods of representation. And although the two types of criticism are not by their natures mutually exclusive, there seems to exist something of a gap between the two, somewhere within which I determined to situate my own work. Although reading the wealth of scholarship available on Mrs. Dalloway readily allowed me to recognize the relative position I wanted my own research to assume among the existing critical positions, crafting a specific research question posed more of a challenge, as it required me to clearly relate that which I recognized in Mrs. Dalloway and found most intriguing as a reader, while also establishing a coherent line of inquiry. And my research problem consistently evaded formation, but I arrived at a question in which I hope to examine the artistic and literary techniques employed by Woolf in conveying the minds and existence of her characters, while also considering the role of mental illness in the larger project of examining interiority. Upon first consideration, the abstract nature which marks much of Woolf's novel, as well as some of the scholarship, might appear a confirmation of the all too familiar criticism that literature and literary research are not grounded in reality. I wholeheartedly disagree. That which is tangible is not more real, and Mrs. Dalloway artfully engages with the nature of existence itself. Pages guide readers through a largely ordinary day in Clarissa Dalloway's life, balancing the progression of her interior life with poetic descriptions of moments and pieces of the outside world as they impose themselves upon her consciousness. Clarissa moves through the moments of her day while reconciling herself to her own past and present, and ultimately encountering death through the suicide of Septimus Spith. In weaving through these thoughts, memories, and interactions, Woolf is working to capture the experience of reality itself. What could be more relevant to individual and collective shared existence? And I would like to close with one of my favorite excerpts from the novel. All day she had been thinking of Burton, of Peter, of Sally. They would grow old. A thing there was that mattered. A thing wreathed about with chatter, defaced, obscured in her own life, let drop every day in corruption, lies, chatter. This he had preserved. Death was defiance. Death was an attempt to communicate. People feeling the impossibility of reaching the center which mystically evaded them. Closeness drew apart, rapture faded. One was alone. There was an embrace in death. Thank you.
Pretty deep. It's going to be talking about researching identity in the context of Murakami's appointment.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How is everyone? So, I'm just going to jump right in. As we come of age, we are mostly encouraged, especially as college students, to form an identity. Find out who we are, come into our own. The role of academia in this cultivation is manifold. On various levels, it engages our intellect, our curiosity, our potential. We are encouraged to question things, to engage the outside world, to interact with others in a way that builds our character and helps us construct an identity. The study of literature is often the study of identity. The process through which we form it, the events in our lives that shape it, even our conceptions of it. Within the context of research, we don't interact with people so much as with ideas. Therefore, our identities are being shaped not through a gauntlet of social interaction, approval, judgment, but by the developing quality of our thought. Universities are meant to cultivate an atmosphere that lends itself to thought. However, you cannot simply gather the smartest young adults around, put them together, and expect them to cultivate identities based on thought without rigorous study. Research grounds the intellect in some of the best thoughts of others, and it often complicates our own ideas. This has certainly been the case for me as I researched the concept of identity for my project. The topic of my research is the Japanese author Haruki Murakami and his novel, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. More specifically, I'm interested in how Murakami explores issues surrounding identity in this novel. As a contemporary novelist, Murakami is writing after the moment known as modernism. This movement brought with it a new way of thinking about identity. Virginia Woolf's famously modernist novel, Mrs. Dalloway, for instance, as Hayden was saying, represents Clarissa Dalloway's identity as manifold. There are at least three Clarissa Dalloways: the hostess, the woman, and the inner self hidden from others. Woolf describes Clarissa getting ready for her party as collecting the whole of her at one point as she looked into the glass, seeing the delicate pink face of the woman who was that very night to give a party, of Clarissa Dalloway, of herself. As moderns ourselves, we all know this experience of taking on different roles or persona in different contexts. And this idea of identity is something that Murakami takes for granted. In my research on identity and his work, I've looked for articles that address Murakami's treatment of identity. Many claim that he rejects the search for identity altogether, but I think it's possible to agree with this and to say that this makes Murakami a modernist, like Woolf, although maybe a more radically skeptical one. In other words, if our identities are manifold or varying, then searching for one single identity is fruitless. But representing the different layers or levels of a person's consciousness can be fruitful, as Murakami's novel shows. For example, our protagonist, Toru Okada, in the Wind Up Bird Chronicle, develops different identities throughout the novel. The identities Toru Okada forms are not always in conjunction with reality. That is, they do not coordinate with social expectation or involvement, much like the research I mentioned before. It's more with ideas. The catalysts for the development of these identities formed by Toru are rooted in ambiguity and mystery, and purposeful obfuscation by Murakami. So in rooting these formations of identity in unreality, Murakami is also able to do something many critics say he is doing in his novel, showing that life in contemporary Japan is extremely complicated. When we examine this subject, Toru Okada, we are confronted with the boku concept in modern Japanese society. It is within this context that the protagonist of the Wind Up Bird Chronicle moves through life. Toru Okada quits his job, dead-end job, and lives off of savings in the beginning of the novel. He looks at want ads, but peremptorily. His conception of identity is not limited by what he does in the workplace, for example. The tone of the novel is indeterminate. That is, Okada has few motivations. His life seems insignificant. And yet Toru Okada is a married man. He identifies with his wife, but only to a degree. One of the rewards of marriage, of being in a university, is the collaboration. It's a shared experience. And so there's this aspect of the social, but so his wife disappears. Murakami bestows him, therefore, with a purpose, so that he goes from this boku concept to more of a, he's forming identities as he goes, as the novel progresses, just by taking action. So when his wife disappears and he resolves to find her, he's bestowed with this. In this way, he searches for one aspect or layer of his identity, and in doing so forms another. That is the identity that takes action for what he believes in, cares for, and cherishes. All of these things apply to my relationship with research. In researching, I've discovered an identity that can be successful, fine-tuned, adjusted, improved, and it is a personal growth that I identify research with. Thank you. I'd like to introduce fellow colleague and poet, Charlsie, the great.
First, I want to talk about how research is not necessarily something that a student will open up and say is beautiful, because it's, it's heavy work, it's a lot of rigorous steps, but we sometimes overlook that these are the things that make research beautiful. So, for my first one, this was a quote that Dr. Terry had on our syllabus that actually, if you read those things, they're really cool. They can be really important. So, this is from Research as a Social Act, So what I took from this and from this class was that research doesn't have to be this solitary act done by a single student. This is something that is really strong in numbers. In this class, like having the reassurance of my peers and my professors and also everyone else that works in the library, thank you very much. It makes it really easy. Well, as easy as it can be. And, you know, it's a thing of beauty. So we'll start with the difficulty of research. So the initial push, the thing that keeps you up late at night picking a topic. This can actually be one of the most challenging things. For me, it was actually kind of easy because my previous semester I had a class with Dr. Kabar, children's literature, and I knew that after we read Peter Pan, this is what I wanted to do my research on. So the endless steps, and there's steps like evaluating a scholarly text, edition of your text, which is actually really hard, was really difficult for me because there are so many editions of Peter Pan, it's mind-boggling. You know, keeping a research log, everything you find on Galileo, using Zotero, you know, the library, trying to keep that all logged, and you know, when you find those things, writing down everything that you found interesting about it, that's going to be helpful. You know, reviewing all of the journals where you can find your articles and making sure that those are the types of journals you want to be using. Evaluating the articles, making sure that, you know, it's kind of pertaining to your overall topic, and that's really going to support you. And then defining your research question. But I did mention I have many, many steps. There's so much more. But this is kind of a process of building up and breaking down. All of these steps are very constructive. So I would be going through my research and think, oh, I know exactly what I want to study, you know, regarding Peter Pan. And then I would go through this research and find articles that didn't really relate to what I wanted to talk about in my research paper. So it kind of broke down my argument, but then built it up in a different way, and it took a new different direction. Staying positive and focused. When, you know, your bed is calling you late at night and all you want to do is go to sleep. But just kind of, you know, keeping that confidence that we sometimes can lack. Condensing is really, really difficult. Like everyone else is saying, you know, condensing and trying to form, you know, one research question, one sentence. How? After all of this different research that you've done. Another difficulty is expressing your own ideas. It's really easy to kind of fall into writing exactly what another person has talked about in their own article. So just kind of trying to find your own voice when you're writing things. It's one thing to write a core paper, and then there's another doing a research paper, and it's really difficult. You know, you have fears that come up like being wrong, you know, being rejected, and being misunderstood. So you just kind of have to fight those, and then having determination is really, really difficult. If you're going and sifting through all of these different articles, you feel like you're climbing a mountain. So now we'll talk about the beauty. So your own capability. You are so capable to do all of this work. And going into this class, I was excited about it because I knew it was going to challenge me. But I found myself doing things that I didn't think that I could do and accomplishing things I didn't know that I could. So you really have to push yourself. And with pushing yourself, you have, obviously with this course, a schedule, deadlines you really can't ignore, and the endless steps that keep you structured and focused. And then with condensing everything down, you finally realize that when it's really hard for you to find that research question, you have so much to say. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't even condense all of this down to exactly what question I want to ask because there's so much you want to say, which can actually be a really, really good thing. And then facing those fears of being, you know, being wrong, being rejected, and being misunderstood, kind of fighting those and really navigating your paper the way that you want to, or navigating your research and having your own opinions. And then reassurance of your peers and professors. This class was really great with, I know that every single one of them is going through exactly what I'm going through. So it really, really helps. And you know, we're only halfway through, really. So next thing you know, we're gonna have just finished our prospectus, and we're gonna have annotated bibliographies, and then comes that first draft, and then the final. So, but all of those things, having, you know, my peers going through the same thing really, really helps me get through it all. So, now we'll talk about the reward. Well, you did it. You know, the reward can be anything you want it to be. For me personally, doing work on Peter Pan, I'm gonna watch the movie after. And I'm just gonna indulge my inner child, and I'm just gonna really enjoy the movie and see it in a whole new light after all my research. You know, you overcame so many obstacles, all those endless steps. And then you did the difficult and hard thing, and it is supposed to be difficult. It's not supposed to be easy, because if it's easy, you're not doing it right. So, enjoy that, even though in the moment, it really hurts. But then you realize you develop so many skills, and you develop skills that, you know, like all my other colleagues have been saying, that don't just encompass English and English majors. This is something that you can do for other majors that will help you even past your collegiate career. And now, is it worth it? It's very, very worth it. You know, in the beginning we were talking about how, you know, you should write in a way where you don't have to exactly pretend to be a scholar, but at this point in time, you realize I am a scholar once you get finished. So I just want to end with research is beautiful, and it's difficult, not easy, and your work is great.
We have a couple of minutes, for questions. You guys can stand up off the floor. What we tried to do here was make transparent research as process, right? I think so often we think of research as this finished, polished paper, the articles, you know, that you find in the library, but what is undergraduate research actually looking like on the ground, day to day, over the course of the semester? So, questions, commiseration?
Can I just say that I live by like that single space thing, where like it really does make it so much easier. It's like you're typing your paper up single space and you're like, okay, I'm done, and then you use double space and it's magical. And it's one of the best feelings I've ever come across in my life.
Sometimes somebody else does it.
And you're not alone.
Well, this speaks to I think, the mental aspect of the research process, which I don't know that we talk about very much, but that, in my experience, all students face, the sort of paralyzing fear of failure, and how to get past that initial writer's block, getting something on the page, right?
So if you're in a job interview, how might you use this experience and sell yourself as somebody who can accomplish something outside of the academic world, but using some of the skills maybe you learned in this class?
I think part of the academic world is liberal arts, developing thoughts, you know, and thoughts don't necessarily, you know, you can't put thoughts on resume, but you can, there's the transmission of thoughts. So communication, when you have an idea and you're trying to express it, there's something above that, that's a higher order of communication than simply networking, I think.
It's also generally recommended to, before you go into any job interview and before you sell yourself to a resume, it's always a good idea to look up a lot of information about the company or the organization that you're working for. One of the things that I learned about research through this class is that 90% of research is knowing what you're talking about. And that's, really if you're entering into any professional field, regardless of what discipline or what field or what, whether it's as a professor of literature or as a professor of science or as a biochemist, it's always important to have a background knowledge as to not only what you're going to be doing in terms of what position you're going to be entering in, but also the organization that you're going to be working for. And that always looks great. And it increases your chances of getting hired. That's how I managed to get hired in this one company that I used to work for, because I looked up a bunch of research before going into the interview.
Purdue Owl?
It's their online writing lab, but it's kind of the standard for, I mean, they have resources for every stage of the research project process, APA, MLA, not just English, for how to write an annotated bibliography about it. A lot of libraries just link to OWL instead of recreating it on their own.
I mean, it's something that Hayden was talking about, like where you're trying to research something and there's not a lot of sources out there that are pursuing the same question you are. Like you might find one or two, and initially it seems like, from my experience, it's very frustrating because it makes writing the paper a lot harder. But at the same time, I think it is ultimately very rewarding because you at least feel, maybe not a lot of people read it, but you feel like you've contributed something new to this discussion.
I totally agree. I feel like a genius when I don't. Nobody else has thought of this. I'm great.
Maybe one last question? Or no more questions?
I was just gonna.
I'm going to ask, so a couple of the topics were specifically research related to the literature. What are some of the other topics, or was that a requirement that it had to
Well,
be?
it's a course that's housed in the English department, although, I mean, Kurt's a theater major, and I think everybody else is an English major. We had it in No.
So,
She's studying,
I'm an East Asian Studies major.
we had a communications major. Couldn't be with us today.
I'm also a history minor as well. And, and there is a couple of classes that I have to write research papers for as well. I've written research papers for history classes beforehand, and managed to do I managed to do really well in those classes. But taking this class has also just kind of helped me to focus more, just give me a lot more information in terms of how to do research in general. Making sure that I have all the meticulously searching all through my facts and making sure that everything that I'm writing isn't just a duplicate or a carbon copy of what somebody else had written beforehand, which is actually quite annoying when you think that you have a really good idea and somebody else already had it. So, but it's helpful toward a history degree as well. And I could see a lot of applications for science and biology in that sense as well, in the sense of trying to look for something that somebody else hadn't already discovered and having to look through every single scientific method and the peer reviews that people had done in order to understand what is the current state of the field. So really in any field or discipline, it's just always good to know what is the state of the field, so to speak.
Also, I wanted to just jump in and say, when you were talking about, this goes back to your question about how this is applicable and outside in the real world after college. You mentioned that you're getting all these ideas that have already been thought. So when you have research and rigorously applied yourself to a topic, you know what you add to the conversation. So you can go in and say, this is specifically what I have done, or what I can do. You know what I mean? So, totally.
And to further answer your point, that although most of us are English majors, people often forget that English is the basis for just about any kind of research that you do, and many of us have had to do some kind of cross-curricular study. Like I had to do things in feminism and psychology and philosophy just to understand my topic, to begin to formulate any form of research. And I believe I can speak for most of us in that we had to go cross-curricularly to understand what we were going in our own direction.
I had to look at Nietzsche a couple of times in order to be able to look at
All right. I think we're out of time, but thank you all for coming.